The room smelled like old wood and nervous energy, the kind that clings to a place where people come to lose things: money, time, or the version of themselves they thought they were. I sat at one side of a long conference table in a mediator's office on the 4th floor of a building in downtown Hartford. My soon-to-be ex-husband, Theodore, everyone called him Theo, sat across from me. He had his lawyer next to him, a man named Garrison who wore a watch that probably cost more than my first car. My lawyer, a quiet woman named Heather, sat to my left with a yellow legal pad and 3 different colored pens. Theo leaned back in his chair like he was waiting for a flight he knew wasn't going to be delayed. He had that look he always got when he felt he had already won something, jaw slightly relaxed, mouth almost smiling. He'd been wearing that expression since he filed. I had been a patent attorney for 22 years. Theo knew this. He had met me when I was already 3 years into my career, already billing 600 hours a year, already showing up to his sister's wedding with a briefcase because I had a filing due Monday morning. He knew exactly what I did. He had just never respected it. That was the part that was hard to explain to people who hadn't lived inside our marriage. It wasn't that he didn't understand the work. He simply decided, somewhere along the way, that it didn't count. Patent law isn't real law, he told me once, maybe 8 years in. We were at a dinner party. His college friend had asked what I did and Theo had answered before I could. She does paperwork for inventors. Technical filing stuff. He said it the way someone might describe a receptionist at a dentist's office. I remember looking at my wine glass and deciding not to correct him in public. I should have said something then. I know that now. But we were married, and we had a daughter together. Our daughter Astrid, who was 4 years old at the time and had just learned to spell her own name, and I told myself it wasn't worth the dinner table fight. I told myself that for 14 more years. Theo was a commercial real estate developer. He was good at it, genuinely good, not just lucky. He built things. He liked to say that. I build things, Lenora, what do you build? He wasn't trying to be cruel, exactly. He just genuinely believed that something you couldn't photograph from the street wasn't worth very much. By the time we were sitting in that mediator's office, Astrid was 21 and a junior at UConn. She knew about the divorce. She was handling it the way she handled most things, by calling me late at night and asking careful questions and calling Theo during the day and asking none. Garrison, Theo's lawyer, opened with a proposal about asset division. They had done a valuation of my practice. Not my firm. I was a partner at a mid-size IP firm, but they had estimated the value of my client relationships, my portable business, what I could take with me if I were to leave. Their number was insultingly low. We believe Miss Calloway's practice represents approximately as Garrison started. That's fine, Theo said, cutting him off. He looked at me directly. You've been coasting for years anyway. Let's be honest. Heather put her hand very slightly on my forearm. It was the lightest touch. It meant, not yet. Coasting, I said. You know what I mean. He waved a hand. The big work, the real heavy lifting, you haven't done that in years. You've been writing the accounts you built in the early 2000s. I've watched you work, Lenora. I know what you actually do. Garrison shifted in his seat. I didn't say anything. Because here is the thing about being a patent attorney for 22 years. And not just any kind of patent attorney, but the kind who spent a decade specializing in pharmaceutical intellectual property litigation, who had argued before the federal circuit twice, who had led the team that protected a cancer drug patent worth roughly $4.3 billion in market value. You learn to be patient. You learn to wait. You learn that the person who talks first is almost always the one who loses ground. I had a folder in front of me. I had brought it myself, separate from Heather's materials. It was a plain manila folder, the kind you buy in a pack of 25 at Staples. It had been sitting on the table in front of me since we sat down, and I hadn't touched it once. Theo glanced at it. He had noticed it before. I could tell from the way his eyes moved back to it every few minutes. He probably thought it was financial documents, or maybe a counter-proposal from Heather's office. Garrison moved on to spousal support figures. The numbers were structured to make me look like the lower earner, which was technically true during the years I'd scaled back to part-time to manage Astrid's early childhood. What they didn't account for was the last 6 years, when I had returned to full-time and then some, when I had rebuilt my billable hours to a rate that embarrassed most associates half my age. What they also didn't account for was the pro bono work, or the board positions, or the lectures. But we weren't there yet. I think, Garrison said, tapping the table with one finger, that given your client's earning trajectory and the nature of her work, the support figure we've proposed is more than reasonable. She'll be fine, Theo added. He said it with a small laugh. Not mean, exactly. The way someone dismisses something that has never really worried them. Lenora always lands on her feet. She's good at the administrative side of things. And there it was. Administrative. The word that had followed me for 14 years of dinners and cocktail parties and school pickups, where Theo explained to other parents what I did. She handles the administrative side of patents. As though I filed forms for a living. As though I hadn't spent 3 consecutive years in the late 2000s in a litigation battle that restructured how an entire class of biotechnology patents was interpreted in U.S. federal courts. I looked at Heather. She gave me a very small nod. I opened the folder. It wasn't a thick folder. That was maybe the thing that surprised me most, looking back, how much weight can be carried in just a few pieces of paper. The first page was a printout, a summary page from the Federal Circuit decision in Calloway et al. V. Meridian Biopharma, Inc., 2009. My name was on it, not as a firm partner, as lead counsel. I slid it across the table toward Garrison. He looked down at it. He picked it up the top paragraph once and then, very quietly, read it again. Theo was watching him. What is that? Theo asked. Garrison set the paper down. He didn't answer right away. That, Heather said, and her voice was steady, is the published federal appellate opinion from a case your wife led a decade ago that is still cited in pharma IP litigation today. It's in the standard textbooks for patent law now. Some programs use it as required reading. Theo looked at me. I didn't say anything. The second page was a list. Speaking invitations, Bar Association honors, 2 awards from the American Intellectual Property Law Association, an appointment to the advisory board of a university law school IP program, and an invitation, twice declined once accepted, to contribute to a Federal Trade Commission roundtable on pharmaceutical patent reform. The third page was a single-column document, a partial client list. Not names because those were confidential, but revenue figures, annual billing. The real numbers, not the ones Garrison's team had estimated. Garrison read the third page for a long time. Then he set it down and turned to Theo and said very quietly, I need a minute. Theo was no longer leaning back in his chair. The mediator, a man named Hargrove, who had barely spoken since we sat down, cleared his throat. We can take a short break. We broke for 15 minutes. Heather and I went to a small waiting area down the hall. There was a coffee machine and 2 chairs. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood at the window and looked out at the street 4 floors below. You could have led with that, Heather said. She wasn't criticizing me, she was observing. I know, I said. Why didn't you? I thought about it. I watched a UPS truck trying to parallel park on the street below, failing, trying again. Because I wanted him to say it first, I said. I needed him to say it, out loud, in front of the mediator. Heather nodded slowly. And he did. The thing is, Theo wasn't a bad person. I want to be careful about that, because it would be easy, so easy, to let this story turn him into a villain with no complexity, and he had plenty of complexity. He had been a good father in the ways that he knew how to be. He coached Astrid's soccer team for 4 years when she was in elementary school. He remembered her teachers' names. He was present in the physical sense of the word. He just never looked at me and saw what was actually there. That is different from cruelty. But it is its own kind of damage, and it is slow. And it accumulates in ways you don't notice until one day you're sitting in a mediator's office, and you feel underneath the calm you have practiced for weeks, something that is not quite anger, and not quite grief, but something with the weight of both. 14 years of dinners where I was the one who does the paperwork. 14 years of his colleagues asking me, so what do you do? And Theo answering for me with a vague wave and a reframing that made me smaller. 14 years of watching him explain my work to other people with a confidence he had no authority to have. I had let it go because I loved him. Then I let it go because of Astrid. Then I let it go because I was tired. Then I stopped being tired and I still let it go, and that was the part I couldn't fully explain. The years when I had the energy to correct him and I still didn't. By then it had become something I carried like a habit, and habits are hard to break even when they're costing you something you can't name. We went back into the room. Garrison had rearranged his papers. He had the manner of someone who had quietly recalibrated. He was still professional. He was still doing his job. But something in his posture had shifted. The particular shift that happens when a lawyer realizes the territory is different than the map they were given. Theo had refilled his water glass. He was sitting forward now. The mediator sat back down and folded his hands. Garrison cleared his throat. We'd like to revisit the figure we proposed for Ms. Calloway's practice valuation. Theo looked at me. I was looking at my coffee cup. I think, Garrison continued, that our initial estimate may not have fully accounted for the scope of Ms. Calloway's portfolio. We'd like to request a brief adjournment to review the materials she's provided before we continue. Heather said. Of course. Theo said nothing. The session ended about 40 minutes later. We walked out into the hall and Theo and Garrison went toward the elevator and Heather and I went toward the stairs because I needed to move. On the second-floor landing, Heather stopped and let out a long, slow breath. That went about as well as it could go, she said. Yes, I said. The Federal Circuit case alone. I know, she looked at me. You're not celebrating. No, I said. She waited. I keep thinking about the dinner party, I said. 8 years in. His college friend asked me what I did and Theo said I handled paperwork for inventors. Heather was quiet. I looked at my wine glass, I said, and I thought it's not worth the fight. We were happy, basically. Or I thought we were. And I decided that his understanding of my work didn't matter as long as we were good. But it did matter, she said. It did, I said. I just didn't know how much until I had spent 14 years being shrunk down to something I didn't recognize. The settlement took another 6 weeks to finalize. Garrison's team came back with revised figures, significantly revised. The practice valuation was adjusted to reflect the real numbers. The spousal support calculation was restructured. Several assets that had been initially categorized in ways that benefited Theo were reclassified. I'm not going to pretend that winning on paper fixed everything, because it didn't. There were nights in those 6 weeks when I sat in my kitchen at 11 o'clock and felt something I could only describe as hollow. Not sad, exactly, not angry, just empty in the space where a marriage used to be. I thought about Astrid a lot during that time. She had asked me, on one of those late-night calls, "Mom, are you going to be okay?" And I had said yes because I believed it, but also because I knew she needed to hear it, and sometimes the truest thing you can tell someone is also the thing that is not yet fully true. She came home for a weekend in October, a few weeks after the paperwork was signed. We ordered Thai food and watched a movie she had been wanting to show me and stayed up past midnight talking about nothing in particular. Her roommate, a paper she was writing about labor law, a podcast she had started listening to on runs. At some point she said quietly, "Dad told me what happened at the mediator's office." I looked at her. "He said you brought some documents." She paused. "He said it changed things." I nodded. "Mom," she said, "he didn't know?" I thought about that. The real answer was complicated. He knew the facts, technically. He knew I had won cases. He knew my name appeared on published opinions. He had access to the same internet as everyone else, and if he had ever typed my name into a search bar, he would have found things. But knowing something technically and allowing it to change your understanding of someone, those are two very different operations. He knew, I said, finally. He just didn't let it matter. Astrid was quiet for a moment. She looked like she was deciding something. "You should have made him hear it sooner," she said. Not as criticism. She said it the way she said most things, gently and directly. Not at the mediator's office. Like years ago. "I know," I said. "You were protecting the peace," she said. "Yes, and then one day, there was no peace left to protect." I didn't answer that because she was right, and sometimes the right thing doesn't need an answer. What I want to say to anyone who has ever been reduced, not destroyed, not attacked, but quietly, consistently reduced, in the way that requires someone who supposedly loves you to look at you every day, Nate, and choose not to really see you, is this. The documentation exists. The record exists. The work you did is real and it is yours, and no one's failure to acknowledge it has changed what it actually is. I am not going to tell you that I felt triumphant walking out of that building. I didn't. I felt tired in the particular way you feel tired, when something you have carried for a long time has finally been set down, and your arms don't quite know what to do with themselves. I went home. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the neighbor's maple tree, which was already turning orange at the edges in that early October way that always made Connecticut feel like a painting. I thought about the moment I slid that folder across the table, how quiet the room got, how Garrison read the top paragraph twice. I had not done it to shame Theo. I want to be clear about that too. I had done it because it was true. Because the truth of what I had built over 22 years deserved to be in the room, even if it hadn't been invited into 14 years of dinner parties and school pickups and cocktail conversations. The truth doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs someone willing to carry it in, set it on the table, and let it speak. I drank my tea. The maple tree outside turned 1 degree more orange in the afternoon light. I had done good work. I had done it for a long time. And that work was mine. Not because anyone handed it to me. Not because a court document now reflected it, but because I had shown up every day for 22 years and done it, and doing it was enough, and it had always been enough. It just took 1 quiet room and 3 pieces of paper for the rest of the world to catch up to what I already knew.